Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because I have one of those people on the show that has probably forgotten more about being a better leader, and even, the data and research about being an extraordinary leader than I'll ever know. And I'm really honored to have him here. Jim Kouzes was born and raised in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., where he and his younger brother, Dick, enjoyed building forts, riding bikes, catching frogs and snakes, mowing lawns, and delivering newspapers and swimming at the local YMCA. Their parents both began their lives in the Midwest, but migrated to Washington, D.C. to find jobs during the Great Depression. After World War II, their dad spent his entire career as a dedicated U.S. civil servant, starting as a file clerk and eventually becoming Deputy Assistant Secretary of Labor. Their mom actively volunteered for community, including the United Nations Association and civil rights organizations. Her passion for world peace led her to invite over 50 international students to live in their family home for a year or more. The exposure to civil service, different cultures, and civil rights was an early awakening to the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Both brothers were Boy Scouts and earned the rank of Eagle, which later led to a pivotal moment in Jim's life. On January 20th, 1961, Jim was one of a dozen Eagle Scouts to serve in John F. Kennedy's Honor Guard at his presidential inauguration. Kennedy's words at that inauguration, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country, inspired him to join the Peace Corps. His service in Turkey led him to change his aspiration from becoming an ambassador to teaching others how to live and work together more effectively. When Jim returned to the United States in 1969, he joined a consulting firm in Austin, Texas that worked with community action agencies developing interpersonal skills. In 1972, he was recruited by San Jose State University to direct a grant project providing team-building interventions to local mental health agencies. There, he met the dean of the Levy School of Business at Santa Clara University and was recruited to direct its Executive Development Center. The first person he met at the Levy School was a young assistant professor, Barry Posner. The two of them discovered they had common interests in corporate culture and leader behavior. Those common interests resulted in a research project on personal best leadership experiences and their first book, The Leadership Challenge. Their 40-year research and numerous collaborations continue to this day. Their most recent release is Everyday People, Extraordinary Leadership, and How to Make a Difference regardless of your title, role, or authority. Jim left Santa Clara University in 1988 to serve as president of TPG Learning Systems and eventually became CEO and chairman of the Tom Peters Company, where he served until 2000. Since then, Jim has been traveling the globe speaking, teaching, and conducting evidence-based leadership development programs. He is the recipient of numerous awards throughout his career. Jim is married to Tae-Kyung Kouzes, an organizational and industrial psychologist who specializes in executive assessment and coaching, and they reside in the San Francisco Bay Area, and his stepson, Nicholas Lopez, is a screenwriter and lives in the Los Angeles area. Jim Kouzes, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
Yes, sir. I am, Jim. Thank you. Thank you very much. When I hear that bio and I listen to it, I realize how all those life experiences have influenced me to where I am today. And I recommend everybody write their own bio so they could have the experience of reliving those experiences.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because for me, I've done or I've conducted over 300 plus episodes on focusing in on this customer experience leadership, customers inside and outside the organization. And I've had many people tell me who've been on many interviews saying, I've never, ever, had to put together a bio like that. Thanks for letting me do that. And because it is just that. I mean, a lot of times we don't see where we've come from and the impact we've had on others because we do this traditional bio.
Yeah, which is more for, getting the job than it is necessarily for talking about who you are. One of the things that we do in our executive development programs and leadership development programs, whether it's with students or whether it's with CEOs, is we ask them to do a retrospective on their life, going back as far as they can, looking at their peaks and valleys and identifying, what led them to get to that peak. And, when they were in that valley, what got them out, what did they turn to, people or values, beliefs. And those kind of exercises really are important for any person, but especially for leaders in organizations, because it does help them, as you say, understand their values and beliefs and what in their past informed who they are. One other thing about that, we know that that leaders at any level who look back before they look forward have a longer time horizon into the future. Interesting.
I mean, that is very compelling, because oftentimes we are driven by today, and sometimes may make decisions that are based on seeing other people as objects, versus, individuals that, we have, the ability to impact, hopefully in a positive way. So this particular book, I mean, I was going through and I was looking at, several different elements of it, because for me, I have a leadership academy called Call Center Coach, and we focused in on that frontline leader. Because if you look at all the research, and we're going to get into some research, is, the unfortunate thing is when somebody gets into that first line leader role, their frontline leader role, a lot of times they don't get any type of development at all. I mean, let's not even talk about the quality of development, until they at least have been in that position for 6 years. That's the average.
Yeah.
That's staggering. It
is.
So when I start thinking about that, I mean, a lot of your work has been done at that very top level, talking about executives and all of that, that work and the research. But this book, really focuses in, it doesn't matter where you are. And then you've taken the research that you have been conducting over the past, 4 decades or so, and really looked at that. And I'm looking forward to us to get into this discussion. But you talk about 5 vital practices that we need to build competencies and then, subsequent skills on top of in order for us to be successful. If you could, can you run through those 5 real quick for us?
Absolutely. And just to underscore what you said, these practices apply to peer leaders inside organizations or in communities as much as they do to CEOs or middle-level managers inside organizations with title, role, and authority. And that's one of the reasons why we wrote Everyday People, Extraordinary Leadership, was to kind of validate that belief that we had with our data. And what we did was we looked at these just peer leaders, individuals, and we had a 360 feedback to them, and then the outcomes that they achieved to see whether or not it was actually true that if you use the 5 practices, which I'll describe, more often, more frequently, you'll get better results than those who use them less frequently. And those 5 practices are, first of all, model the way, which is about being clear about your values and beliefs, and then walking the talk, setting an example for other people based on those values, shared values and beliefs, not just your own, but the ones that are shared by a team or an organization. The second practice is what we call inspire a shared vision. When people get extraordinary things done, they are clear about where they want to go, they envision the future, and then they inspire others, they enlist them in that vision based upon a set of shared aspirations. So like with Model the Way, it's not just your values and beliefs, it's others' values and beliefs as well. And with vision, it's about shared aspirations, hopes, dreams, and aspirations that we all have. The third practice is challenge the process. If you're going to take people to a new and imagined a future that everyone is excited to want to achieve, you have to do things differently. You can't do everything the same. So you have to challenge the way you're currently doing them, searching for opportunities to innovate, grow, and improve. And then you need to experiment, do some things you hadn't done before. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So you got to learn from those experiences. The fourth practice is what we call enable others to act. Enable others to act is about fostering collaboration. You can't do it alone. So you've got to build the team. You got the team to trust each other, and then strengthen the individuals, build the skills and abilities and the confidence to execute. And the final practice, not because it's the last in a series of 5, but because you have to talk in some order and write in some order, the last one we write about and found in our research is what we call encourage the heart. Getting to a new place, doing things differently, making mistakes and learning from them, persisting over the long haul to get something extraordinary done is tiring. It's difficult. And so you need to encourage people to keep it up by both celebrating your successes and the values and the vision you have, and also recognizing individuals who make a contribution. So model, inspire, challenge, enable, and encourage are the 5 practices.
Well, when I think about that, you mentioned that the research has been fairly stable in regards to those, elements and aspects, really being important factors, since the research has been conducted. But for me, I have to start thinking about the conditions and how they've changed, the, globalization and how it has changed things, and all these different cultures, the polarization, of our society and our political systems. And I start thinking about, well, has there been a shift like recently, or, is it something that is still consistent, but things are just more rapid?
Well, we make a distinction between content and context. And one of the things that we have found, and we keep testing this, in fact, we're doing a whole new analysis of just 2020 that's beginning now, and will probably take us several months to go through all our data just to test this to make sure. But early indications are the same. Context can change, and quite dramatically, as it did with the pandemic in 2020. But the content of leadership has not changed much at all. We've learned a lot more about leadership and how to demonstrate these practices, but the practices themselves haven't changed. We know that when we look at the data, do we get similar results, better results, different results from the same practices in 2019, 2020, 1987? And we can do a comparative study. And what we find is that the more people execute more frequently on those 5 practices, which we measure using a leadership practices inventory, getting feedback from peers, getting feedback from direct reports, getting feedback from outside observers, that the pattern remains the same. The more frequently you engage in specific behaviors that demonstrate those practices, the more likely it is you'll have positive outcomes.
Well, when I think about that, one of the things that we focus in on is how the work that we do or don't, how it impacts the customer experience. So how does all of this impact the customer experience?
Well, let's just take a couple of examples. If you make a promise to a customer, you make a commitment to a customer, does it matter if you follow through on that commitment or promise? I mean, logically and just, based on experience, we'd all say, of course it does. If you promise something to a customer, does that mean anything to the customer? Well, we took a look at that data, and we find that leaders who follow through on the commitments and promises more frequently than those who follow through less frequently have more engaged employees, have people who feel like they're making a difference in the organization, feel more trusted. And those people then follow through themselves with their end user customers because they see that behavior demonstrated among their leaders. That's just one example, and I could give you 30 or 40 different examples like that. Similarly, when you say that we need to search for new ways of doing things because times have changed or products have been developed, does it make a difference whether or not you do that behavior, search for new ways of doing things? Well, we look at our data and we find that whether it's 1987, 2019, 2020, or now 2021, the more frequently leaders search for opportunities, the more likely it is that people will feel like they're making a contribution to the organization, that they're able to feel personally engaged in the work that they do. And those engaged people will more likely themselves to be able to provide innovative solutions to their customers. So is a direct relationship between outcomes that people deliver to the customers, whether it's quality of service or quality of product, or if their constituents are the investors, that the companies are more profitable as a result of these behaviors.
Oh, so in other words, you're getting some insider information.
Exactly. In fact, one can use this data as predictive of the outcomes organizations will get. They're sort of surrogates for all of that. In some respects, you don't even have to gather that other data, that end user outcome data, because you can just look internally and see if people, to the extent to which leaders are engaging in these behaviors and the engagement internally, and predict what you'll get externally.
Okay, so now you bring up something that I've been talking about for years, and that is, there's two things. I'm going to start with the first. One is, I've always said that we can absolutely eliminate and wipe out the entire voice of the customer industry if we just did a better job of leading our people, because the customer would just be taken care of. And essentially, you validated what I've been saying for years. Is that correct?
All of it. Yeah. Well, I don't want to eliminate that business. I think that feedback, it's still very useful, because one of the things we talk about is looking outside the organization, and getting data from the outside is always helpful. But yes, you're right. We can predict profit, other performance measures, depending on the type of organization, speed, absenteeism, return customers continuing to come back, retention of customers, all those things based upon the data we gather internally. The more leaders engage in exemplary leadership behaviors, the more engaged employees will be. The more engaged employees are, the more likely it is that they'll retain customers. The customers will be more satisfied.
Okay, so then if I was to look at data, because I worked for a research scientist where we did measure the customer experience, and I saw these things happening internally, and I could essentially predict what their outcomes were going to be from a customer perspective. It was very telling. I learned about the whole independent and dependent variables when you're talking about trying to drive a specific outcome. So in other words, number one in modeling the way has a more significant weight, in my outcome of whatever I'm trying to, measure for, and therefore, I guess you'd say, influence the outcome, whether it's engagement, whatever it may be, profitability, cost reduction. And so if you look at over the course of the years, has there been consistencies with the variables as far as, what's dependent and, independent variables and the movements?
Well, let me use an analogy. I know you're involved in sports. And so let me try to use a sports example. We have 5 practices, so kind of equivalent to a pentathlon. And when you're engaged in a pentathlon, you have to execute 5 events. You have to engage in 5 events and try to get the highest possible score for overall. You don't necessarily have to get the highest score for javelin throwing, but you do need overall to get the highest score in order to win the pentathlon. And so what we tell leaders is every practice makes a difference. And you can't, if you're going to compete in a pentathlon, say, well, gee, I'm not very good at long distance running, so I think I'll just skip that one. You can't skip an event and compete in a pentathlon. Similarly, you can't eliminate one of these practices and expect to even compete, let alone do as well as others. And so that being said, at different times, different practices become more significant. For example, let's take the pandemic and what organizations had to do internally in order to respond to customers. So let's just take a simple example we all know well, a restaurant. If you're a restaurant and your business implodes all of a sudden, there's nobody coming to your restaurant because the doors are shuttered, what are you going to do? Wait it out? Or are you going to try to innovate and improve and find ways to serve customers in a different fashion than you did. More than likely, it's that, not just waiting it out, because you'll have no income. And so challenging the process, searching for opportunities, experimenting, taking risks, and doing things differently becomes more significant at that moment. It doesn't mean all the other practices are unimportant. In fact, what we have found, interestingly enough, Jim, is they're more important in times of challenge and difficulty. But that's just one illustration of how some of the practices might become, the valence might increase, their importance might increase, but all five are still essential.
That's very helpful insight. Then the other thing for me is, I'm like, looking at this from a longitudinal study perspective. I mean, you've been studying this for 40 years. You've seen some consistency in the data, there's a lot of organizations, such as yours, that have been doing these types of measurements and have been doing executive leadership, development and learning, for those 40 years plus. I've even had some people that I noticed that we were jointly connected on LinkedIn that are in this space, like Karen Hurt, Doug Hall, an expert in innovation, Steve Farber, Bernie Swain, Mary Lippitt, Chester Elton, Dory Clark, Christine Porath, Dan Rockwell, Bill Treasurer, Chris Edmonds, Chip Bell. There's a lot of people who have some deep domain expertise to try to fix this problem, but yet we still have a leadership crisis. How come we haven't fixed this?
Couple of explanations. Just let me give you a little bit of data from us and other colleagues. If you look at when is the first, and you mentioned this in a conversation we had, when people get their first leadership development experience. Typically, across the majority of organizations, large and small, someone does not get, a person who becomes a manager doesn't get their first leadership development experience until somewhere between age 35 and 40, after they've been supervising other people for approximately 10 years. That's their first. So it's understandable that if you've been practicing managing and leading other people for 10 years and never gotten any experience, that you're not going to be all that good. You coach pitchers. Imagine throwing a pitcher out onto a mound who's got no training in pitching and expect them to do well. That's what we do to managers and organizations who are expected to lead other people. That's the same story for somebody who's on the front line who's expected to lead a project team, those people have had even less opportunity to participate in leadership development. So one of the sad things about leadership development is we still operate on this assumption that either you have it or you don't. We're going to promote you because you've shown us some ability to gain followers and for people to follow you. Well, that may be true, but there are still methods and techniques. You watch somebody pitch and you see that they have a good arm. And you say, well, that person might make a good pitcher. Do you then just throw them out there? No, you don't. You train them or they won't be any good. And so while it may be true that some people show some ability and have some confidence to lead other people, they need training. And the sad fact is that they get it after 10 years of supervising or leading other people. We need to start much earlier. So that's one factor. A second factor is that one of the things we found, Jim, in research that I did with my wife, Tag Young, who's more expert than I am, I think, in this business. She coaches executives one-on-one and has very intimate knowledge of their day-to-day behavior. She and I and Barry Posner did some research on mindset. So using Carol Dweck's framework, you're familiar with that. So fixed and growth mindset, those who believe either you have it or you don't, and you're born with it. And those who believe you can change and develop your abilities over time, the growth mindset. So we looked at mindset in relationship to leadership practices. And we took our 5 practices: model, inspire, challenge, enable, and encourage. And then had this hypothesis that those leaders with a growth mindset will engage in these practices more frequently than those with a fixed mindset. That's what we found. That those leaders who believe they can grow and develop, and that other people can grow and develop over time, that their talents are not fixed, do better. Those with the growth mindset engage in these practices more frequently and do better as leaders. So another issue has to do with kind of the assumptions we make about ourselves as leaders. And we need to examine that. So those are a couple of explanations. And I think the third one is just very simply, we were all in this, this last 18 months or so, well, now it's been 15 months or so, thrown into a tailspin. Our lives were disrupted. We didn't quite know how to handle the situation, didn't know what to do. And we were all flailing a bit. So I can understand a little bit about now leaders, stumbling a bit, making mistakes, not quite doing everything. I mean, when you're leading remotely, it's a new experience for the majority of leaders these days. They've had to get up to speed. So some of it right now is understandable, but I think people have demonstrated they're pretty quick learners, and we'll see more better remote leadership going forward. So I don't know, those are three explanations.
Well, it's very helpful. I mean, and what you're just saying right there is an important component to why, I started the Call Center Coach Leadership Academy. It's to, fix that problem. It's one of the biggest opportunities in, my home space, of being in contact centers that exists. I mean, there's been a 4-decade plus, 5-decade plus, problem associated with employee turnover, and people keep trying to buy software and systems and motivation applications, and this, that, and the other to fix this core fundamental problem. I mean, it's like, and I think you bring up a really important point too that we all need to address is the starting point of where people are, meaning that, well, I have some of these core raw skills, and therefore I can take those and be developed. Everybody's at different starting points, right? It's much like that athlete. I mean, there's some people that I can take and say, okay, for me to help you to become, a pentathlon, for you, we got 10 years of work in front of us. Where this person, we can be there in a year and a half, right? Well, the same thing applies from that, that leader perspective. And so more and more people that are coming into the workplace have further away starting points of success because of everything that's happening in regards to being self-immersed in devices, social isolation, using the social media to manage my thoughts and process, all those types of things. So to me, the crisis has the potential of just getting much worse if we don't address that issue of getting them sooner.
Absolutely. And we know also from our data that the younger in age people start learning leadership, the more likely it is they'll enter. It goes back to your analogy. Some people who have had some early experiences in their life are just better prepared. If you're, in Boy Scouts like I was, and my brother was, and if you've had opportunities you've volunteered in the community and you've been part of volunteer groups and you've led project teams, or you're in school and you were in high school or college and you involved in clubs and organizations where you took on leadership roles, you're more prepared. And if you had parents who taught you something, my dad had a shelf full of books on management and administration because he went through his bachelor's and master's and PhD classes all at night after work. And they were on his bookshelf. And every now and then I'd grab one. And I think some of my early interest in this field came from just looking at those books on my father's bookshelf. So if you have those early experiences, you have a leg up, but that doesn't mean you don't need any training after that. You still need continuous learning. One other point about this, again, using our research and others, we have found that leaders inside and outside organizations who actually spend more hours learning end up engaging in the 5 practices more frequently.
Okay, so then that brings us to talking about this learning and how the process and the things that we need to do, what needs to be put in place. And you talk about 3 things specifically. You talk about experience, example, and then the education. So if you can, we've kind of talked around these things. If you can address those directly, please.
So we and others divide learning into these three buckets. One way of learning obviously is to, you want to learn to lead, volunteer or accept an assignment to lead other people. That forces you then to get some experiences. Might be a good idea before you do that to learn by example, which means watching other people who have done it before and be proactive about it. If you see somebody that you think is doing some things that you'd like to learn how to do, knock on their door, write them an email, give them a phone call, say, I wonder if I could shadow you, maybe sit on a meeting you lead. Would that be okay with you? I'd like to learn from you. Initially, if you're a bit shy, maybe that's not the first step you take, but believe me, people are willing to do that if you ask. That's probably one of the ways in which I learned early on what I learned about leadership before I got to study it empirically, was just to ask people if I could learn from them. So that's learning by example. And then, of course, enrolling in leadership development experiences as early as you possibly can so that you can learn some of the techniques and methods that will be helpful. It's much like if you want to learn to sell really well or to deliver a quality customer experience, enrolling in as many courses and classes and seminars and virtual experiences as you possibly can. Hold on a second. As you possibly can really will get you up to speed faster. So those are three ways of thinking about how can I learn? What experiences can I avail myself of in order to just get in there and do it and learn from those experiences? Who can I watch, observe, ask to advise me, give me some feedback, mentor me, and then what is available to me in terms of training and development.
Well, and talking about that, study and research and things like that. Before we started the Call Center Coach Academy, when we really looked into 35 years of research that we've collected specifically about that contact center frontline leader. And one of the things looking at adult learning practices, we discovered that by far, it was a very large percentage that, adults learn best when they're in a community of practice of their peers. We learn, it's a little bit more of that structured, mentoring type of scenario, but we're doing it, amongst a group because there's also a lot of fear barriers that get removed. It's funny how as humans, we'll tell things that we're struggling with, to complete strangers, but we won't tell our colleagues, right? Just what we do. Yeah. Also, too, if we have a peer group within our own, organization, well, we're all playing in the same darn sandbox. We don't get different perspectives. You talk about the diversity and inclusion, please. So we built that into the program, and it's part of a multimodal, learning process. So when you start thinking about peer community and learning, where does that fit in these three E's that you have?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because I was just reading yesterday about peer learning, in fact, and the advantages of it. One of the things that we often talk about in Lead by Example is we make it one person. And that one person might disappear from our lives and turn over, or we may go to another organization or part of the organization and not have that opportunity to follow or to learn from that one person. But if we think about it as peers, we have a group of people so that if one person moves on, there's still others. And one of the advantages of peer learning is that you have multiple different examples, if you will, that you can learn from, and other people who can give you feedback about how you're doing, and other people who can give you advice. And so peer learning would fit in the learn by example, as well as you can practice leading in a peer group. You can say to others, and I advise people to do this all the time, tell people what you're trying to learn. I'm trying to learn how to listen better. And what I'd like you as my peer group to do is to give me feedback at the end of our time together on how well I listened. Did I interrupt? Did I talk over people? Did I check for my understanding of what people were saying? Use that group as a way to get experience. So it's both their example and your experience. And you can even, from time to time, peer groups often become learning cohorts where they might go through a developmental experience together. So you can apply the other E, the education piece, to that as well.
Well, and then there's some advanced methods like accountability partners and things like that.
Yes.
I think come into play.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I would dare to say that when you start talking about the course of your career, going back from, the climbing of the trees and playing with your brother, all the way to where you are today, you've had opportunities to talking about that self-discovery and learn some things. You're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that, or, I should have done that differently. And so there's humps that we all have to get over. Is there a time that you can remember that you have gotten over the hump that you can share?
I think that the biggest hump for me was that, like a lot of others, because leadership was talked about, at least I thought about it early in my life, as something one person does, that I looked at it as an individual experience and that I was just focused on me. And I had a absolutely wonderful opportunity when I was early in my workplace career, maybe about a decade or so in, when I was asked to chair a professional association conference. And I was thinking about what can I do as a leader to help and make this the best conference that we've ever had. And I was talking with a colleague of mine, Mike Doyle, who had a company called Interaction Associates. And Mike, and I was sharing with Mike, I said, I'm trying to figure out, how to do this and how to lead this organization and who to get involved, who to put on a planning committee. And Mike said to me, why don't you involve everybody? And I said, everybody, what do you mean? Like the 150 or so local members who are going to be putting on this conference? He said, yeah, you can get everybody involved. And that was a moment in which I realized that I was thinking just about leadership as being one person, me, and a few other close people to work with. And what I realized is that you can engage all of your constituents somehow, some way, if you think creatively. And I remember that experience as my first personal best leadership experience. And it taught me that you can't do it alone, and that you are capable. We are capable of involving and engaging many more people in the work that we do in some very creative ways than we thought we could.
Well, definitely. I mean, your work is inspiring in a multitude of ways, as well as you. So I know that there's some other things that are fueling that. And one of the things that we look at on the show to talk about inspiration are quotes. Is there a quote or two that you like that you can share?
Well, I'm reluctant to quote myself, but I will quote somebody in relation to that last story that, again, reinforced that message I just shared with you. When I interviewed Don Bennett, the first amputee to climb Mount Rainier, that's 14,410 feet on one leg and two crutches. I asked him a couple of questions, and I'll always remember his examples. And this was, now nearly 35 years ago. I said, Don, so, you're the first person to climb that mountain on one leg and two crutches. How'd you do it? And he said, one hop at a time. When I first started to climb that mountain, he said, I looked up at the top of that mountain and I said, I can see myself up there. And I imagined myself being at the top of that mountain 1,000 times in my mind every day. But when I started to climb and I looked at my one good leg and I said, anybody can hop from here to there. So I did. One hop at a time. And I remind myself and the people I work with that leadership is not about just getting to the top of the mountain. You don't fly to the top of any mountain. You do it one hop at a time. Focus on, once you're clear about where you want to go, focus on that first hop, then the second one, and then the next one hop at a time. The second thing he said, relative to what we were talking about earlier in my own epiphanous moment, he said, I said, so what was the most important lesson that you learned in climbing that mountain? And he said, you can't do it alone. If it weren't for my wife and 7 kids, I wouldn't be alive today. And if it weren't for my team, I never would have made it to the top of that mountain. And I think leaders need to understand, all leaders need to understand that leadership is a team sport, and you are working with other people. It's a relationship, and it's the quality of that relationship that's going to determine the quality of your leadership.
Well, as I said, pretty inspirational, and thank you for sharing that story. It's something that 35 plus years ago still, breathes fire in you today. And I think that's...
I love to tell the story.
It's an awesome story. Okay, now you also talked in the back of the book that you had aspirations for others. So if you could share with us, what are those aspirations that you have for others?
Well, I hope that as leaders, individuals can realize that they have that potential. That my aspiration for others is that they be able to have an impact on how others think about themselves, on the values that they have, that they are able to inspire others and help to influence others to be clear about their own aspirations. That I hope that we can have the kind of impact through the work that we do, that individuals will feel like they can learn from their experiences and take more risks than they can today, that they do today, that they'll learn and survive and do even better and look at challenges and opportunity. And I hope that they will realize that leadership is something that is about a relationship, and that improving their relationships and building trust is of value to them in their lives, in the community and at work, with their family and with their teams. I hope that people will also realize that others need encouragement from them, and will take the time every day to demonstrate their appreciation of the accomplishments of others, and that they will also take the time to just do a little inventory of how grateful they are for what other people have done. Now, one of the exercises that we encourage people to do is think about the following scenario. Imagine that 5 years, 10 years from now, you're winning the Leader of the Year award. Make that assumption. And put yourself there 5, 10 years down the road, where you're in the audience, you're the recipient of this award, and onto the stage go your friends and family and the coworkers and colleagues and customers. And they all talk about you, and they talk about the lessons they learned from you, the ideals you stood for, the feelings they had when they are around you, and also the evidence that you had an impact. Lessons, ideals, feelings, and evidence, LIFE, life for short. What do you hope other people are saying about the lessons they learned, the ideals you had, the feelings went around you, and the evidence you had an impact on them and others? If you just did that one exercise, I think it will help you to see what you aspire to do, what you aspire to become, and then work backwards. What can I do today in order to get to there 5, 10 years down the road?
And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Jim, the Hump Day Hoedown is a part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Jim Koussis, are you ready to hoe down?
Let's hoe down. Wee-hoo.
All right. So what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
Adapting to the virtual environment of remote leadership. And there's so much to learn in so little time.
What is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
I'll repeat, you can't do it alone.
And what would be one book you'd recommend to our Legion? It could be from any genre.
Right now, I am loving Adam Grant's newest book, Think Again.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus information from today's show by going to fastleader.net and doing a search for Jim Kouzes. And Kouzes is spelled Kouzes. Okay, Jim, this is my last Hump Day Hold On question. But imagine you've been given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25, and you can take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you, but you can't take it all. You can only take one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
I'm going to repeat, you can't do it alone. I think that is the most important advice I ever received. And if I just think that way, I cannot do this alone. I have to rely on the relationships I have with other people. And and they are my customers. They are the people that I rely upon, and I need them. And I cannot do it alone. Can I just add one other thing to that?
Please, sir.
We can, I think, reflect, if we will, on how when we're in an interaction, whether it's with one person or 100 people, just ask yourself one question. What can I do in this interaction to make sure that that person or those other people feel more competent, more powerful, more efficacious, better about themselves after this interaction than they did before? Whether that interaction is 1 minute or 1 hour, what can I do in this interaction to make other people feel that way?
Jim, I had a great time with you today. Can you please share with the Fast Leader Legion how they can connect with you?
Well, we have a website with about our work called leadershipchallenge.com, www.leadershipchallenge.com. And you can also find me on LinkedIn.
Jim Kouzes, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. The Fast Leader Legion honors you and thanks you for helping us get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.